Hi, this is Pia from UFO Denmark. On behalf of our group, I'd like to again welcome Melinda Leslie back to UFO Sundays, and we've been looking forward to seeing you again. Welcome.
Thank you. I look forward to doing it. I'm very excited to be back. Thank you for asking me back right away.
Yeah, it was so interesting, and now you're going to be giving a different talk about the steering group of ufology, and we're looking very much forward to it. So when you're ready, just let me know, and we can get on our way.
Real quick, for those who may not know who I am, obviously I'm Melinda Leslie, and I've been very involved as a UFO research investigator for 30 years now. I live in Sedona, Arizona, where I do my full-time gig, if you will, is a UFO sighting tour where I take people out with military night vision goggles to have UFO sightings. I've done about 1,090 tours now, and I guarantee sightings your money back. I always say it's a good thing we see them every time, or I'd go broke in a hurry. But I've been very, very involved as a UFO research and investigator, and as well as I am an abductee who went public, has been public for at least about 28 years. And but thank you again for having me. I'm so excited to be speaking again for a European audience because I haven't done much of that in the past. And so my last presentation on MILABs, which is kind of the precursor to this one, and this one for a European audience is extremely exciting for me. So thank you so much to Pia for that, and to UFO Denmark. Okay, this presentation, Ufology's Minders, the Management and Manipulation of Disclosure for 40 years. Also, Ufology's Minders, I kind of have two titles for this: an example of how the game is played, or what is past as prologue, a quote from William Shakespeare. First, I want to start with get to know your terminology. Minders is a term coined by abductee and remote viewing expert Angela Thompson Smith. It refers to an intelligence community, IC, insiders involved in befriending abductees and minding their lives. Used in the title here, in my title, to reference these same types of insiders involved in the minding or watching and manipulation of the UFO field. Disclosure with a big D. Disclosure with a big D is an official announcement of an extraterrestrial presence by a head of state or government or leading scientific organization. Disclosure with a little d, also known as soft disclosure or controlled disclosure, is a slow trickle for the acclamation of the public, building up to a possible larger reveal or announcement, or an announcement by a lesser agency or unofficially. The leak of something, or the leak of something undeniable. For example, this week's US Navy confirmation of the 3 videos. I'm going to ask Pia and Karsten really quick, have you heard about that in your news there in Denmark? Is that making as big of a news splash as it is here?
It is. I was interviewed for the national television station a few days ago, and the newspapers have been writing about it. So yes, it is. It is a splash here also.
Great, great. Well, I figured it probably was. So the leak of something undeniable, in other words, the Navy coming out, an official Navy spokesperson saying that those 3 videos, the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and the Gimbal, as they're all nicknamed, based upon the quotes of the pilots, for those that don't know, that's where that came from, obviously. And so this week's, just within the last couple of days, the US Navy confirming that those are indeed real videos of UAP unknowns is very exciting. So that's a perfect example of soft disclosure. So I thought when that happened, I have to include it in here because it's the perfect example. Okay, disinformation. From the dictionary, it means false information deliberately and often covertly spread in order to influence opinion or obscure the truth. The data is incorrect. Misinformation. from the dictionary is wrongly or badly informed, such as having wrong or inaccurate information about a topic. The data is correct but misleading. UAP, since I just brought that up, is unidentified aerial phenomena, an officially recognized way of saying UFOs. I used to have in this presentation saying that that was a new term. I'm learning now quickly that that is not a new term. It has actually been used by the military, by the government, and has surfaced before in the UFO field in a more obscure way, but it's not a new term. And it was most likely used to reduce any possible perceived stigma associated with the UFO acronym, obviously the ridicule factor. So it's important to note that this term was introduced by the insiders/managers, not by the UFO field. To the Stars Academy, or TTSA, To the Stars Academy, founded by rock star Tom DeLonge and announced in October of 2017, a private organization consisting of ex-highly placed individuals that may be disclosing the truth behind UFOs. They were the ones responsible for releasing the existence of AATIP and OSAP, and Grant Cameron was considered by many to be the go-to guy when covering what was going on in the original development of the story and brought people up to speed on all the latest developments. And that's a lovely painting of Grant there. Throughout this presentation, whenever possible, I used the artwork of Doug Ald. He's very well known in the UFO community and interestingly very close friends with Ron Pandolfi, one of the working groups. I thought this is perfect to use his artwork, but that's one of his paintings. He's an amazing artist, and that's one of his paintings there of, in this case, Grant Cameron. He did a whole whistleblowers series where he painted different pictures of famous whistleblowers, UFO and military insiders, etc. And so when possible, I have that artwork, and when not, I have a photo throughout the rest of this presentation. But thank you to Doug Ald for that. Okay. AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a Pentagon program to monitor and collect data on UAPs, tongue-tied, sorry, unidentified aerospace phenomena, otherwise known as UFOs. Disclosure of this program first appeared in the New York Times on December 16, 2017, in an article about it, AATIP, To the Stars Academy and Bigelow Aerospace. OSAP is the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. The original name before AATIP was actually a larger umbrella program of which AATIP fell under. My understanding currently, and it's open to change, is that OSAP may no longer exist, but that AATIP does. I'll go into that more a little while later. So that OSAP maybe went away, but AATIP, once it was formed, still exists now separately, obviously not under the umbrella, if in fact that's the case. So the new disclosure story, this and similar phrases are used in reference to the events just discussed and the ongoing developments associated with them. So often people are calling it the new disclosure story. BASS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Science Studies, formed by Robert T. Bigelow as a subsidiary of Bigelow Aerospace LLC. Evidence suggests that it was a replacement for NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science, which was Bigelow's organization looking into UFOs, abductions, and paranormal cases. Did they replace a research organization with a for-profit company, or for redirection of focus on the technology instead of on the paranormal? That's my question. Rockefeller, oh, I realize I have a typo there. I need to fix Rockefeller Initiative. Billionaire Lawrence Rockefeller approached the Clinton White House to get the government to disclose the truth behind UFOs. What followed was years of FOIA requests, very famous emails, and extensive contacts between many individuals involved. Steve Bassett is considered to be the go-to guy regarding this important saga, I should say, and the role it played in the new disclosure story. A very important past history role that shouldn't be forgotten. And again, a Doug Auld painting of Bassett. Get to know your terminology. ATPWG is the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, often referred to as just the working group or the Advanced Physics Group for short, but the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. A group consisting of intelligence insiders, aerospace insiders, and other such individuals working together to understand the UFO subject and gather data on it, all while operating behind the scenes in the UFO field. I'll tell you lots more about them in just a minute. MILAB, an acronym for military, MIL, abduction, AB. This refers to extraterrestrial abductees that have covert human personnel, military, intelligence, community, or similar insiders involved in their experiences and or involved in their lives. This includes the monitoring, surveillance, harassment, minder scenarios, being abducted by aliens with any of these personnel also present, or being outright abducted by these personnel, whether with aliens or without them. The term was coined by abductee Cat Wilson in 1996 as a way to reference these types of experiences and was popularized in ufology by authors Helmut and Marianne Lammer in their 1997 book, MILABs, Military Mind Control and Alien Abduction. And obviously I have a full presentation on that I did just this last month for UFO Denmark. And it is available on the internet, for viewing that presentation. And I recommend it because it kind of goes together with this one. Okay. Now, the next thing, clarification is needed. Forgive me for reading the following, but I need to explain some things before we begin, and I need to attempt to do so very concisely. And I'm very nervous. Nervous because what I'm going to attempt to communicate today is very complex, difficult, and even risky. Too much so to convey in only 2 hours. How do you boil down a 28-year research project into 2 hours? Well, you don't, okay? But what I can do is give you the idea, an idea that will cause you to think and research for yourself. Risky, because not everyone may like what I'm about to say. Certainly not those involved, okay? I will attempt to stick to just what the research shows and let you make the conclusions as to what it all means. There's many implications by what I'm saying for the next 2 hours, but I'll let that be up to you. There's a couple times I interject my own views, for sure, but I'll attempt not to, okay? How's that sound? It's worth mentioning that this research is always changing and updating as new info is available. And just when I think I figured something out, I often learn my assumptions or data were incorrect. It is always in a state of flux and quite tricky to stay on top of, just like the groups and individuals it covers. And thus, I reserve the right to be proven wrong on any given point, and I welcome input and corrections from researchers in the UFO field or from even those mentioned in this talk. Additionally, I've been accused by some individuals in the UFO field of following the current disclosure story in an effort to quoting someone, a researcher, ride on its coattails in some attempt to gain notoriety by linking myself to it. This is far from the truth. I have been very personally involved with some of the major players in this story for many, many years. My involvement with one of these very individuals went back all the way to the early 1980s, prior to my learning of my own extraterrestrial abduction experiences. No joke, prior to my learning about my own abductions. And it continued, my relationship with him continued up until his death just about 4 years ago. It wasn't until 1989 that I discovered that I was an abductee, yet I knew these guys going back before, or at least one of them going back before that, to the early 80s. The realization now that it is likely some of these people that I'm mentioning knew I was an abductee long before I did is a big pill to swallow. In the early 90s, I discovered I was also having the MILAB events, which led to researching my own experiences of it, then the experiences of other MILAB cases. I've helped those abductees involved and eventually made a name for myself in ufology as an expert on this difficult subject. For information about my MILAB research and experiences, please see I just said this, but I'll read it here. My recently posted online lecture presentation for Exopolitics Denmark, titled The Covert Program of Reverse Engineering Extraterrestrial Abductees, in parentheses, MILABs, available on the UFO Denmark YouTube channel. Later in the 1990s, I fell onto a complicated story of the existence of an official working group involved in the UFO field and consisting of real insiders who were engaged in the UFO secrecy story. It so happened that this group of insiders was also involved deeply with abductees, many of which were my MILAB research cases. As it turns out, which also included myself. When I became involved in my MILAB research in the early 90s, I also met what was to become my research partner, Randy Kopang, an amazing researcher with a steel trap mind who never misses a detail, has a far better, no joke, far better memory than I, and whose help I couldn't have done it without. Thank you, Randy. Together, we have been researching the working group and its involvement with ufology and with abductees for over 28 years. As it so happens, Randy's and my research, as well as my personal story, would end up being intricately entwined with the current disclosure story due to some of the same insider characters involved. And for me, a very current and up-to-the-minute personal involvement at that. No joke. And I feel it's important to add here that in recent years, the members have mostly been the ones to initiate the contact with me, not I. In other words, it came from them first, mostly. Since meeting Lorian Fenton, the director of MUFON Sonoma Marin in 2012, I have shared much of that ongoing research with her, as it was also so closely linked to both her work in mind control and the super soldier research. Then in November of 2017, after realizing that researcher Grant Cameron had come across many of the same findings as Randy and I decided to share our research with him. Since then, I'm proud to say that I am also research partners with Grant, along with Lorian and Randy. Putting our combined years of effort together as a team makes for stronger research, leading to a more accurate information and moves us all further along than we would be capable of our own. Hopefully ufology can learn by that. I developed this new lecture mostly because Lorian and Grant encouraged me to do this, but also because Randy and I realized that our 26 or 28 years, I should correct that, of research had something to say about the current disclosure story. Actually, it has a lot to say. Our research speaks to the little-known history of the working group, a group which may very well be behind this. More importantly, our research speaks to just how the disclosure game is played. And more importantly, it speaks to how the game is played and how important it is for the UFO field to understand this. For that's what it is, a game, albeit a serious one, but a game nonetheless. You're about to see just what I mean. Also, for clarification, I am not inferring nefarious motives for these groups or the individuals involved in them. In some cases, though, their actions do that for me. It could very well be that these organizations or some of the individuals involved with them have the absolute best of intentions. But there is a track record here for many involved where the truth has not appeared to be their objective. Instead, it has the appearance of something else, something less than truthful and much more controlling or manipulative. Even though I am friends with some of the individuals that I'll be mentioning today, I question these various associations and motives. That, and I'm a MILAB, and I don't owe anybody anything. We all know that boy, if you saw my last presentation, you know what I mean. Okay, we all know that disclosure has more than likely been an over 70-year plan of slow public acclamation, leading to a public acceptance or the reality of UFOs and an extraterrestrial presence through an orchestrated unfoldment of evidence. I have titled this lecture, Ufology's Minors, a Management and Manipulation of Disclosure for 40 years, due to it being approximately 40 years that a specific group of individuals has also been involved in that orchestration. They have been keeping an eye on minding the field and disclosure efforts, managing it and manipulating ufology for that long and longer, and maybe, just maybe, including manipulating this new disclosure story. Regardless, and maybe, just maybe, manipulating this. Oh boy, I think they are. Okay, regardless, a little past history is often required to understand a current situation's dynamic and complexities. And through understanding what the current disclosure story was born out of, we may know where it is going. Or, as I quoted Shakespeare previously, what is past is prologue. The Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, their history. Okay, to be covered in the rest of this lecture, how a Nexus Cabal is born, how I fell into it, revisiting a joint lecture Randy Kopang and I gave at the International UFO Congress back in 1999, some over 20 years ago. That was only the beginning of it all. And so back then when Bob Brown was producing the conference, he said to us, "Come, I need you guys to come lecture on this." And we thought we were giving a lecture on the, totality of research we had been doing for 2 years or longer. And little did I know that that was going to be the very beginning of a long road. It has always dovetailed with my MILAB research. Ed Dames speaks for MUFON, and I'll get more into this in a little bit, but Ed Dames speaks for MUFON Los Angeles in '94. What he said to me, that started it all for me as far as my investigation of this. So there's a jump-in point, And then the working group has always had an interest in abductees. I'm going to demonstrate that in spades. Anyone who's following the To the Stars or AATIP story who thinks that they're not having an interest in abductees or that they've been downplaying that, you guys don't believe them for a minute. They have a long history with it. Their goals as stated in the original meeting agenda of 1985, and I'm going to get more into that in just a minute. But, well, I can talk a little bit now. Okay, so they had an original meeting at BDM Corporation in a secure vault file room, vault file, file vault, I guess, in BDM Corporation in Virginia in 1985. Now, I believe that the group existed before then, but that was its official kickoff or its official forming or its planning, its direction going forward. But I do have every reason to believe it existed prior to that. I'll get into that in a minute. Their goals, as stated in that meeting, were abductees and DNA. So that was a big thing they were interested in. Abductee psi, meaning paranormal psychic abilities. Alien technology, obviously the reverse engineering, etc. To pursue an abduction database. And item number 3, listed under their project theme, was to consolidate, everyone take this to heart, was to consolidate existing data to establish a threat. Don't believe me? Here it is in their own words. This is the agenda and notes from their 1985 meeting at BDM Corporation. The highlights were added by me. On the left is the original agenda. I'm going to get more into this, but a man who was in attendance there had these in his own personal files. Upon his passing, myself and another researcher were good friends with his family or with his wife, and she provided some files that he had to us, not knowing what was in them. And in there were this agenda, notes, and overhead projection transparencies. You know, back in 1985, there was no such thing as PowerPoint, obviously. So it was, you know, the infamous projector unit with the transparencies laying on the glass, and that's what they had. So these and copies of those, copies of everything from that meeting were in this file. And she let us go through it, not knowing what was in a couple of file boxes that she had. And after having it gone through it, though, this was the most significant information. But now, as time goes by, if anything, its relevance has become more significant because it's surfaced to backing up information within the Wilson document, which I'm going to get into a little bit more a little later. So as you can see in the agenda, a research and development program needed. And then on the right, handwritten note by my friend that was in attendance, one of the gentlemen who was part of this group. I'll go ahead and say it was the late Jack Houck. I have no problem with saying that. So it says 5/21/85 is the date, and does this support research and development? And then the next are pages from those overhead transparencies, and you can see on the left that their possible goals are listed. One of them is to obtain technology spin-offs, non-lethal weapons, biological controls of processes, new materials, agricultural productivity, I guess that's supposed to be agricultural, I think, wideband stealth, a develop a gravity interaction system, obviously anti-gravity, and to discover high-tech, reliable paranormal performance using technology, okay, there, and to parry a Soviet threat, to consolidate existing data to establish a threat, a UFO database, classified database, and an abduction database, and then going down to the bottom there, obtain direct physical contact, physical or cyclical or psi, and there was trying to make contact with ETs. Their role in ufology: 5 members of the working group, the names of which will be included in the list to follow, have shared just what their role in ufology is, explaining how their participation is something other than being truthful. But again, don't take my word for it, in their own words. So member number 1's quote, so this is a member of the group I'm about to get into, all the individuals, not all, but the ones that I'm aware of at this point. Members 1 quote is said to Melinda, I call this quote the "we're in it to spin it" speech, referring to specifically the working group's involvement in ufology. Quote, we're in ufology to, and so this was actually said directly to me by one of them. Quote, we're in ufology to spin it in the direction we want it to go and away from where we don't, end quote. And, quote, sometimes we have to derail the train, end quote. He also said, quote, we answer to a bigger umbrella group, end quote. Member number 2's quote is said, again, directly to me. For the first one, this member used the old shill game involving 3 cups, kept moving with a P under them, you know, the shill game, okay, with a P under, and then you have to guess where the P is, right? One of them as an analogy for the manipulation of the field. Quote, under heavy camouflage, cover, and deception, you're never sure what cup the P is under, end quote. And another time, the same gentleman said this to me about the role, quote, it's all diversions to keep the highly curious, meaning UFO researchers, entertained, end quote. Well, they've been entertaining us, no doubt. The last couple of years, they've been entertaining us big time. Okay, their role in ufology, in their own words again. Member number 3, quote, as said again to me, referring to the manipulation of myself and other people in the UFO field, quote, you are in a closed information loop, end quote. Member number 4, so the 4th gentleman said, quoted as said to another researcher in the field, referring to, this guy was referring to his own personal involvement in ufology, quote, I have no delusions about my ability to derail the train, but it is well within my capability to decide whether I am going to be part of the train crew, a passenger on the train, an observer, or an attempted saboteur of the train, end quote. And a fifth person, their quote as said to yet another researcher, so this to a third researcher, referring to the aviary at the time of his interview, quote, "We have managed to keep the UFO pot stirred for the 2 decades or more that we've been in business," end quote. And at the time he was asked if he knew of the working group, and he responded, quote, "There are many folks doing this," end quote. And so on that note, here are some of those many folks. Ufology's mind is a confusing and growing membership list of insiders. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Walter Scott. So I'm going to explain this and you can hopefully blow it up on your own personal laptop and home computer screens, but it says groups and affiliations across the top, which I also call the disclosure playing field. So that's the disclosure playing field, groups and affiliations. On the left are the players, the various names, and Grant Cameron calls them the Cosmic Club. So I give Grant full credit for what's first calling it there, the Cosmic Club. And then across the top, you have the ATP working group column, and that I put by itself. And then you have this green area, which I call new disclosure, which is to the STARS board, their board of directors and support people. And AATIP, the AATIP program at the Pentagon. So I put that in new disclosure. Old disclosure, I call the Rockefeller Initiative, column 1, NIDS, a column, Aviary, the Aviary column, ISSO, which is Joe Firmage organization, a column, and the ufology field, their involvement in the ufology field. So I put that there in the white area. The yellow area is intelligence community involvement. So this is if they've had intelligence community involvement. The kind of blue area there is ET tech development. I wanted to say reverse engineering, but there wasn't room at the top. So I call it ET tech development, but reverse engineering development. And then I have BASS involvement, Lockheed Aerospace or other aerospace companies, so any major aerospace company involvement, advanced technology, so other forms of advanced technology other than specifically involvement with BASS or Lockheed or aerospace. And then the next purple area I call ET mind. Again, there wasn't room at the top to put ET consciousness. So consciousness development, the psi development. So I have, if they're involved in psi or paranormal research in one column, abductee research involved with abductees in the center, and then to the right, neuroscience or DNA involvement. So then I have these individuals on the left, and out of extensive research for many years and to the absolute best of my ability, and at times I had them in more columns and then I took them off. So I want everyone to know I tried to be really, really research-based about this. I tried to make sure I was accurate if I put an X in the column. And again, I may have made some mistakes because I'm constantly, cleaning this up. But so down the left, just to give you an example of some names: Robert Bigelow, Dr. Hal Puthoff, Colin Kelleher, John Alexander, Kit Green, Lou Elizondo, Scott Jones, C.B. Scott Jones, Ron Blackburn, Steve Justice, Colonel, and maybe that's important for me I should probably be including that. Robert Bigelow, Dr. Hal Puthoff, Dr. Colin Kelleher, Colonel John Alexander, Dr. Christopher Green, Lou Elizondo, Dr. C.B. Scott Jones, Colonel Ron Blackburn, Steve Justice, Dr. Ron Pandolfi, Dr. Eric Davis, Dr. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Jim Semivan, Dr. Gary Nolan, Dr. Paul Rapp, Chris Mellon, Jack Houck, and if I have retired next to their name or deceased. And then once I put the X's in the columns that applied, then on the far right, I totaled it up. And then I reordered everything, in the names based upon which of those things they checked off the most on. And I was very surprised that Bigelow came off checked off the most. So maybe people won't be. Of course, then Hal and Kelleher and John Alexander and Kit Green, you expected those. But but even Bigelow was up there. So there you go. Okay, now the next is more people involved. So a whole list of names going down the left. Again, you can blow it up and look on your screen at those list of names. Many of them you'll recognize, some of them maybe not so much. And again, if they had a relationship to this, I checked them off. And again, I'm willing to be, corrected, but I've tried to really do my research, and I felt accurate in doing that. So there's lesser numbers going down the right. And then the next bit, okay, so, and there's probably many more names. A lot of people who've seen me do this presentation or have seen variations on this online have said, well, wait a second, there's a lot more names than that. Well, I stuck with the names that had the most amount of checks. I didn't need to go on and on if they only checked off or on 1 or 2 columns, that kind of thing. So I guess they had to check off on at least 3 columns for me to have them on here. And if there's someone that really should be added, I'll add them, and maybe someone of lesser significance at the end of the list can be knocked off, that kind of thing. So, but I put in red here the name Oak Shannon because that will matter later when I bring up the Wilson document information. And I already had him on this list. I created this list years ago. I updated it. I used it in a presentation I gave about 2 years ago. And so I already had his name there. I went back now just for you guys today and put it in red because I wanted to show everyone I already had him involved in the list. So the number of players, 54 total. And then I totaled the X's down at the bottom. Well, here's what a synopsis of what I came up with there. I said, okay, are some of the To the Stars now new members of the working group, if it even still exists? I postulate that yes, I think it does, even if unnamed. Obviously, these individuals are going forward doing what they were doing all along. And I'm about to prove that to you in spades. So if so, there may be as many as 46 members out of the 55 names on this list that have a To the Stars connection. If not, 34 are on record as past members. So 34 of the individuals on this list are on the record as past members of the working group. If it exists, as I just said, even unofficially, there may be more. 42 out of, and I'll get into why that might be later based upon some conversation with Jim Semnivan and things that he told me. Again, I'll get into that later. 42 out of the 54 names were either directly in the intelligence community. 42 out of the 54 names on that list were directly in the intelligence community or were contractors to it. 24 out of the 54 names have either been in the aerospace industry or have had a business connection, again, like contractors to it. Most of those with Lockheed, not all, but a high percentage of them with Lockheed, 24 out of 54 names. 48 out of the 54 names have been involved in advanced technology research, for example, exotic propulsion and breakthrough physics research, 48 out of the 54. 33 out of the 54 names have been involved in psi or paranormal research. 42, and when I have something in blue like this, it means it's something significant. And I just went back and bolded this because it jumped out at me reading it just yesterday. 42 out of the 54 names have demonstrated a specific interest in abductees or have been in organizations that are specifically involved with abduction cases. 42 out of the 54 names. Worth noting is that 17 names have been involved with neuroscience and or DNA research. Most of those were neuroscience. All of these numbers are likely to go up as more information becomes known. Recent research suggests many more individuals may need to be added, and this list remains a work in progress, and is subject to change. Now, groups and affiliations, the disclosure playing field. The text color key for the following timeline size. Blue text are topics of significance. Pink text text refers to circumstances involving me directly. So if it involved me directly, I have it there in pink. And purple text refers to anything abduction related other than specifically me. So anything abduction related, but again, if it's specifically me, it's still going to be in pink. But anything else abduction related is in purple. Groups and affiliations, the timeline of manipulation. So pre-1980, Philip Corso, the late Philip Corso, tells researcher Bill Burns, when he was, when Corso was still alive and still working with Bill Burns very closely at the time, he told him that he was involved in a previous incarnation of the working group. And that came because back then, not in 80, but many years ago, in 25 years ago, I was sharing this research with Bill Burns. And he ended up asking Corso if he knew anything about it. And Corso said, "Do I know about it?" He said he was involved in the group in a previous incarnation. So there you go, even Corso. And then he told Bill Burns, he said, "Who told you this? Who figured this out?" And Bill Burns told him about me, and he said, "Go tell." So when Bill Burns eventually sat me down and said, this is direct quote from Corso, he said, "You tell that young lady she has some serious cojones." So I consider that one of the best compliments I've ever had, coming from Philip Corso. So he stated in his book, quote, "The cover-up is the disclosure, and the disclosure is the cover-up," end quote. You guys, I could close this computer down, go home right now. That sums it up. The cover-up is the disclosure, and the disclosure is the cover-up. That's exactly what's going on. Okay, so January 1980, and that was a quote from Corso. So January 80, only 3 weeks after the Bentwaters, England UFO event, Bentwaters, Rendlesham Forest, okay, Bentwaters joint NATO base, okay, very famous event. Colonel John Alexander, who again, I have one of Doug Ald's pictures there, Colonel John Alexander aggressively calls Colonel Charles Hall, the deputy base commander at the Bentwaters Woodbridge Air Force Base, several times about the UFO and abduction events which had just taken place. With Colonel Holt told me himself, after hearing me give a lecture many years ago, not long ago, by 10 years ago, on my MILABS event, he approached me afterwards. He said, "We got to talk." And I had mentioned John Alexander in context of my presentation, and he said, "You know what?" He goes, 2 weeks after the event in 1980, John Alexander, and he didn't, of course, know who he was then, but he introduced himself upon calling him, called him and knew every detail about the incident, and the base was still under complete lockdown. No one went public with anything about that event till 3 years after it originally happened. So I guess in 83, 84, okay. But it happened in 80, and 2 weeks after the initial event in the first 3 nights, which went on for many nights, but after the initial event, he said, so let me get back to this. These calls occurred while the base was under strict orders not to talk. Somehow Alexander already had a detailed information regarding the events, and Colonel Holt refused to acknowledge any of it to him. Nothing would be publicized till 3 years later. Charles Holt shared this with me directly in 2009, so that tells you when, I have it right there. Upon hearing my MyLab presentation, he also added that he was therefore, quote, very concerned about John Alexander's role in ufology, end quote. 1980, Agent Aviary member Rick Doty contacts Paul Benowitz, starting a long saga with feeding him disinformation and hoax documents. These guys never called themselves the Aviary. Okay, I just want everyone to understand that. That was Bill Moore, UFO researcher Bill Moore, very famous, and Jamie Chandray, who brought out the MJ-12 documents. Upon meeting insiders and working closely with them initially, said, so we know who we're talking about when we have phone calls and conversations and whatever. correspondence with each other. We need to call them something because we don't want to use their names. So they gave them all bird names. So that was Moore and Chandray who gave them all bird names, and then collectively called them the aviary. Maybe in jest, maybe these guys behind closed doors, meaning the working group, maybe eventually called themselves the aviary. I don't know, and I maybe have to ask one of them if that's the case. But Moore and Chandray were calling them that, so that's how that whole story began of calling them the aviary, was they gave them that name. And there is some evidence, which I'll get into in a minute, that maybe at some point they did call themselves that, but it was only after Moore and Chandray gave them that name first and gave them all the various bird names. So just so everyone's clear, the aviary is the working group. Okay, moving right along. 1981, Bill Moore gives Paul Benowitz host documents. One of these documents is the first reference to MJ-12. April 93, Agent Rick Doty, there he is again, one of the artwork by Doug Auld. Okay, Agent Rick Doty conferred with cause lawyer Peter Gersten, who introduced him to Linda Moulton Howe. Doty chaperones Linda onto Kirtland Air Force Base to read allegedly official intel briefing document, ET Involvement in Human History. That's the title of it. Bill Moore also claims to have seen this same document. 1983, Bill Moore receives phone calls from 12 of the listed members who he came to call aviary insiders. These insiders persuaded Moore to trade UFO data in return for insider-sourced information. Moore explained this quid pro quo at the 1989 MUFON Symposium in Las Vegas, Nevada. Let's just say it didn't go over well at all. Okay, it's very infamous. It did not go over well with the audience. Okay, 1984, it pretty much ruined Bill Moore in the UFO field. 1984, Jamie Chandray and Bill Moore received the MJ-12 documents. That happened in 84. Okay. May 85, the working group officially begins and has its first known documented meeting at BDM Corporation in Virginia. 1985, Melinda meets Jack Houck while attending his psychokinesis class at spoon bending. Okay, psychokinesis, mind over matter, moving matter with the mind, manipulating matter with the mind. Melinda eventually takes multiple PK, psychokinesis, and remote viewing classes from Jack Houck. At the time, Melinda had no idea of Jack's background or affiliations. It would be years before I would learn of his involvement with the group or his full knowledge of my experiences. Back then, I had no clue that he knew anything. I didn't know anything, you know, and I was just taking his classes. I heard about him from a friend, and then he was doing at a kind of a new age paranormal center with classes and whatnot. He was doing them there, as well as a friend of mine had him at a private thing at someone's house, and that's where I started going to these classes and whatnot with them in both psychokinesis and remote viewing. Okay, 1988, aviary member Bill Moore, and that's a photo of Jack Houck there on the left. 1988, aviary member Bill Moore, along with Jamie Chandray, facilitate the primetime TV special UFO Cover-Up Live with some of the aviary associates and these intelligence folks, you know, that they were dealing with appearing in the TV show. It's very famous, and I recommend everyone go research it online. It's available, can be watched. 1988, Ed Dames, John Alexander, Ron Blackburn, Albert Stubblebine, and David Morehouse start up the company SciTech together, which is a remote viewing company. Years later, Danes takes over the company completely, but originally it had John Alexander, Ron Blackburn, Albert Stubblebine, and David Morehouse all involved in its formation, along with Major Ed Dames. 1988, Senators Daniel Inouye, Ted Stevens, and John Glenn, who were all mentioned in the New York Times article On to the Stars and AATIP of December 2017. These guys were all mentioned. They were all mentioned as assisting Senator Harry Reid in procuring funding for the AATIP program at the Pentagon. It turns out they also helped save the remote viewing program when it came under attack in 1988. And again, in keeping it funded up until the mid-1990s. Have they been working with the group all along? I think obviously yes. Did Bass go to their old friends to once again help with funding, this time for funding AATIP? Of course they did. Now, how did I put this together? I have this very old copy of the book pictured there on the bottom left, Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies by Jim Schnabel. Many of the guys in the remote viewing program and the military guys who come forward and teach it, whatnot, I'll recommend this book as the kind of the, and it's been reprint actively over the years because of its popularity. And I have a new version, but in my old version, one day I was trying to save it. It's my original one, so that's why the corners are so torn and everything on the book cover. That's an old, really old paperback. And the pages were falling out. So one day I have it on my kitchen counter. Since working on all this and doing this research and in the last 2 years, and I'm trying to retape pages into it. And no joke, you guys, a couple of pages fell out on the counter in front of me. And this page in the middle, I see right there, and I see this comment that when other opponents of the Reagan administration were fighting the continual funding of the remote viewing program, that these senators stepped forward to save it. Well, and their names jumped out at me in their pictures, because there's Inouye, Glenn, and Stevens, who were mentioned specifically in the New York Times article mentioning AATIP and To the Stars and, you know, breaking the whole story. And yet it says that these guys helped procure the funding for AATIP. Well, here it is in 1988, working with the working group. They procure the funding for the continuation remote viewing program. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's probably a nice, strong limb. It's probably not even a flimsy one to say, what do you bet they helped got the funding for the remote viewing in the first place? So not only were they helping save it in 88, they probably in 80 or whatever, you know, helped got the funding for it. So I think that's safe to say. So here is the page from the book. 1989, Robert Bigelow sets up this. How many people know Bigelow goes this far back with this? Bigelow sets up the Zeta Reticuli 2 Corp for Bob Lazar. For Bob Lazar, yep, that's right. But Bigelow helped fund Bob Lazar when Bob Lazar was going to, you know, start up, I think, some of his technology research in 1989. When he was first going public, he knew, he was introduced, I don't know how this happened, but he knew Bigelow, and Bigelow set up the Zeta Reticuli 2 Corp for him. It helped him with some funding. So this is how intertwined this stuff is, guys. Wrap your head around it. Okay, 1990s, Ed Dames hires an ET abductee MILAB remote viewer to work at SciTech in the 90s, who later shared that after a wage dispute, Dames threatened her and revealed to her intricate details of one of her MILAB abductions, which indicated that either he had actually been present and participated in that event, or that he had watched a videotape of her, you know, interrogation and MILAB procedure. Due to the amount of exacting detail he knew, she had never previously told anybody about her ET abductions or her MILABs. And here he knows details as if he was either present in one of them or watched a videotape of it. She thought he was probably present or there, but not in the same room, but watching it on a closed circuit, you know, kind of situation. 1990, author Howard Bloom publishes his book Out There about 17 members of a working group. Prior to his book, there was no public knowledge of the group, only other than the Aviary Association, but no public knowledge of it as the working group, only an occasional rumor. Mr. Bloom states, Mr. Bloom names, some of the members, and he draws the connection to having the exact same members as the Aviary. So he makes that connection in his book in 1990. 91 to 92, Bigelow backs the Roper Poll survey on abduction. So he funds that. Roper Poll survey, the report of those results is titled Unusual Personal Experiences. 92 to 93, Bigelow backs Area 2000, a radio show pre-Coast to Coast with Art Bell, George Knapp, and Linda Moulton Howe. 92, Gordon Neville contacts an abductee on the behalf of Hal Puthoff and others. There's a photo there of Hal Puthoff. Gordon Neville contacts an abductee on behalf of Hal Puthoff and others. Alexander also calls her. Their stated objective was to recruit her to interact with ETs and for DNA. She declined repeatedly, but it went on for many months. During this time, she was having extensive MILAB abductions, along with other unconnected intelligence agents monitoring her, and extensive black helicopter harassment. Agents who came to her door, these were guys in suits, came to her door and stated they were aware of her contacts with these guys, with the working group. And I say, a little spy versus spy going on, question mark. You know, so she's dealing with multiple groups at the same, trying to figure out who's who. How come the guys coming to her door are asking her about her involvement with these guys? It's very convoluted. Okay, early 90s, Aviary member and agent Robert Collins contacts a well-known abductee about her own abduction story. They became friends, and during a visit by him, she has a MILAB abduction seemingly unconnected to his being there. So again, this is Robert Collins, one of the Aviary members, is there and involved, you know, in the personal life of an alien abductee, and also MILAB case, seeming, you know, and she has a MILAB abduction while he's visiting with her, seemingly unrelated to him. So it's very similar to the above story. Okay, early 90s, Jack Houck recruits an abductee MILAB for her remote viewing skills to be involved in a remote viewing project. 1990, Jack Houck then asked me repeatedly to participate in the same remote viewing project that he asked this other person. But I declined due to my being very paranoid at the time. I didn't know of the working group till years later, but I was paranoid, and he got mad at me because he really wanted me to participate, and I got paranoid about it. And so I got dropped from that. But it came up again later, so I'll get into that. Okay, 93, Dan Smith, on behalf of Aviary member Ron Pandolfi, calls someone hosting an ongoing abduction support meetings, that were not publicized at all. So it was like word of mouth. They were not publicized. So how did these guys know? Okay, he persistently calls her, offering valuable UFO information in exchange for all of the abductees' names and contact information. She never provided him that information. Of course, she never provided any of the group's names or numbers or, you know, anything. And Dan Smith was contacting her on behalf of Ron Pandolfi. And this goes back to 93. And of course, that's Dan Smith and Ron Pandolfi in those pictures. Excuse me, 1993, Hal Puthoff, John Alexander, Gordon Neville, Burt Rutan, and Dean Radin Visit reverse engineering electrical engineer Bill Uhouse. Bill designed the electrical system for the flight simulators at Area 51, or that's his story, but I knew Bill when he was alive, had had many conversations with him about this, and found him very believable. He also confirmed some parts of my experience that I had not told anyone, and he knew something about it and confirmed part of it for me, which not only validated something for me, but also validated his having had knowledge of such a thing, or having access to that knowledge. Okay, so Hal Puthoff, John Alexander, Gordon Neville, Bert Rutan, and Dean Rain visit reverse engineering electrical engineers. So they all come together to Bill Uhouse's house. Bill designed the electrical system for the flight simulators at Area 51 used to train human pilots how to fly the disc. They gave him a project briefing document. So when they came, they gave Bill a project briefing document and tried to financially persuade Bill to aid in building a levitation device. He was offered a check in his name, so they had it all made out to him, for $250,000, which he did not accept. He later told me that only Dean Radin, who is a University of Northern Las Vegas professor of psychology, very famous author and researcher of psychology and parapsychology. Okay, he told me later that only Dean Rain seemed to understand what he told them regarding how the pilots interface mentally with the craft, with the disc. 1994, Bigelow funds Linda Moulton Howe's cattle mutilation research. Okay. So Robert Bigelow funds Linda Moulton Howe's cattle mutilation research. 1994 to 1985, Bigelow helped form a coalition of UFO organizations along with MUFON, CUFOS, and FUFOR, Mutual UFO Network, Center for UFO Studies, and FUFOR, Fund for UFO Research, called the UFO Research Coalition, URC. A project called the Ambient Monitoring Project to measure environmental changes during an abduction. That was all funded and put together by Bigelow, working with all those organizations to, again, measure environmental changes during an abduction. I'm not sure what science and equipment they were using to do that, but if anyone knows more about this, I'd like to know. 1994 to now, Bigelow funds the MUFON STAR team, and I say the now question mark because I question whether there's still funding there, or there wasn't for years, and maybe Bigelow's back funding it. That's what I'm hearing through the grapevine. I don't know what's true. Bigelow funds MUFON STAR team project. I do not know when it ended, and I have reason to believe, or I'm hearing through the grapevine, he may be funding them again. 93 to 2006, Rockefeller Initiative exists. 95 to 2000, so that involves many of these individuals. That's a whole nother story, but if you're following the work of Steve Bassett, hopefully you would know that. Okay, 95 to 2004, NIS, National Institute of Discovery Science, was founded and started on behalf of Bigelow by many of these exact same guys. So there's Puthoff, Alexander, Com Kelleher, and Kit Green. 95 to 97, and others, others were involved, but they were definitely involved. 95 to 97, NIDS pays abduction researcher John Carpenter. So this is NIDS, okay, for Bigelow, okay, and those same individuals pays abduction researcher John Carpenter, who is director of abduction research for MUFON from 1992 to 2001 for abductee case files. The data included medical records and hypnosis sessions. This controversy is now known as the Carpenter Affair. It ended after the abductees found out about it and were understandably upset. That they're very upset. This was a huge, huge controversy when this happened, you guys. Were understandably upset that their case info was shared without their consent. At this time, abduction researcher Yvonne Smith, and hypnotherapist obviously, was also approached by NIDS, but immediately declined involvement. It is believed that the MUFON Abduction Hypnosis Transcription Project data was also purchased by NIDS, therefore Bigelow. it is believed by many that the MUFON Abduction Hypnosis Transcription Project, which was this huge, very good thing done many years ago, but that was purchased by NIDS. 95, another famous abductee began receiving phone calls from Gordon Neville. He said he was calling on behalf of people interested in her husband's research into ET craft propulsion. ET craft propulsion systems, as well as her own ET abduction experiences. So her husband was doing technical work, and she's an abductee. And here we have again, Gordon Neville contacting them, saying, and that was in 95. In 95, Robert Wood begins to verify the MJ-12 documents. By the way, Bob Wood was at that original meeting at BDM Corporation. I should probably mark on that list of names. That would be a good thing to do in the future. Who of the members were all present at that original meeting in 1985? But Bob Wood was definitely one of them. And he begins to verify the MJ-12 documents, which, you guys, it kind of looks like the working group members release these documents to Maureen Chandray, and then one of the working group members involved from the get-go also then becomes the guy verifying their, I think that's called conflict of interest, for starters. I'm just saying, pointing out the obvious. 1996, NIDS letter. Okay, now this is a new thing that I've added, and I'm leaving some room on this slide in case I eventually want to say more. Just this last summer was the releasing of these documents now known as the Wilson documents. In 1996, a NIDS letter, so part of these documents, it consists of three things predominantly. One was a series of emails and a memo about those emails from various NIDS members to each other. The second was Dr. Eric Davis sitting down and interviewing Rear Admiral Thomas Wilson. And then the third, and his notes from that meeting. And then the third was a letter from NIDS to the Science Advisory Board, consulting NIDS at the time, and particularly a letter that went to Dr. Edgar Mitchell. So here we go. The NIDS letter goes to Science Advisory Board member Dr. Edgar Mitchell. That was released, so it was released in 2009 as part of the Wilson documents leak. This letter shows they knew more than they were letting on in 1996. So again, this letter's written in 96, going to the advisory board, and it states stuff that, who knew that they knew all this back then? But the letter references their abduction interests throughout it. Now, I've just proven that in spades already in this talk, that they have that interest, and there's more to come. We're really talking about 96. But that letter states their interest throughout the letter in multiple of the paragraphs. It states that NIDS is working on multiple abduction projects at the time. At that time, currently going on, multiple abduction projects. It says within the letter that alien implants were sent to Los Alamos Laboratory to have tests done, and that they received results back, and they were going to have an upcoming meeting about those results. The letter states that NIDS had metallurgical analysis results already at that time. You guys were talking 1996, way before the Atom Project, way before metamaterials. They had metallurgical analysis results from Los Alamos that they were going to go over the results of in 1996. In 1996, Bigelow purchased Skinwalker Ranch. 97, Melinda goes to Ed, and Skinwalker's a whole nother thing, so I didn't get into it here because it's a whole nother ball of wax. Okay, 1997, Melinda goes to Ed Dames' lecture for MUFON Los Angeles. And upon his hearing of Melinda's friendship with Jack Houck, Ed Dames tells me about the existence of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group and gives me many of the names of the members. This same evening, he threatens me to completely drop doing my MILAB research. And he says to me, quote, or something will happen to you and I will see to it personally, end quote. 1997, the very next day, I have a heated conversation the very next day. So I go to this MUFON LA talk, and it didn't come up during his presentation or anything, but afterwards he's out in the parking lot, and there's this gate going out to a parking lot from a big garden area, and you have to go through this narrow gate to get to your car to go home, right? And I'm about to go meet up with a bunch of people at a, Denny's coffee shop afterwards, and I go to say, excuse me, going past this group. Well, I start up a conversation with kind of long story short, with Ed Dames about my having had known Jack. And that's what starts this whole thing. He sees the moment now, I realize, all these years later, I become very clear. He sees the moment when he realized I knew Jack. I believe he had been thrown out of this group, that he was in it all along and had a falling out with them. That's Ed. And that he may have used me to piss them off, because he did use me and it did piss them off. So I think that is exactly what he was trying to do. But what he told me was so amazing. He told me about the existence of the group, their meetings, who, listed about 10 people in it. And then that same evening, the conversation switched, and he goes, so what do you do? I told him about my MILABS research. And again, you guys, this is back in 97, and he threatens me to drop it, or says, or something will happen to you, and I will see to it personally. 97, the very next day, I have a heated conversation with Jack Houck. What I didn't tell Ed that night was the next day I was taking a remote viewing class from Jack that I'd been in, going on for a couple weeks. And so I did not say anything to Ed. I played stupid. He said, oh, when it's next time you're going to see Jack? I said, oh, I don't know. He said, well, do you think you're going to see him next couple of weeks? I said, maybe a month. I don't know. Well, little did he know I was actually going to see Jack the next night. So the very next night, I have a heated conversation with Jack Houck where he confirms the existence of the working group. He says regarding UFOs, so he said a lot, but these are just some very important quotes. Quote, I know more about it than you could dream that possibly anybody could know, end quote. And later says in the same conversation, quote, I was never part of any of that stuff that happened to you, meaning the MILABS. He said, I was never part of any of that stuff that happened to you. Thus, inferring he knew all about my MILAB events, because he brought it up. He brought it up, all about my MILAB events, and that others were involved in them. 97, Bob Wood confirms his involvement. And so again, right after that, within a couple of weeks, I see Bob Wood at MUFON Orange County, and I confront him about it. Bob Wood confirms his involvement and multiple details of the working group in a conversation with me. He also said they, quote, answered to a larger umbrella group, end quote. 97, John Alexander confirms his involvement in the working group with me. After denying it many, many times in a conversation, I went to hear him give a lecture somewhere. I waited outside when he was done, talked to him privately. He denied it, and eventually, because I knew so many facts, and I'd spoken to Ed and to Jack Houck and to Bob Wood. So at this point, I knew enough stuff. So John confirms his involvement. He later writes about it in his book, UFOs, Myths, and Conspiracies and Realities. But that was not till 2010. And in 97, he confirmed his involvement with me, but he didn't write about it till 2010. 97, Bigelow donated $3.7 million to UNLV to establish, in other words, Dean Radin, to establish the Bigelow Chair for Consciousness Studies, which is Dr. Dean Radin's department. And he included research into metaphysics, near-death experiences, and ESP in 97. 1998, Randy and I speak for the International UFO Congress about our research on the working group, immediately after which, because Scott Jones was there and in the audience. Now, prior to this, I had no idea that he was involved. Although he was always on our maybe list because he was so closely associated with these guys that I'm like, okay, what do you bet he's involved? So we talk all about the group. We name names. We didn't have his name, so we didn't name it. Immediately after the talk, Scott Jones, CB Scott Jones, approaches me in the hallway and says he's a member without my even asking him. He said, "You're right. I'm confirming what you said in your talk, and I was a member." It just blew my mind. Ed, Jack, and the others had not mentioned his name ever. I'd not come across his name. That was out of the blue when he told me he was a member. 99 till now, Joe Firmage organized the ISSO, International Space Science Organization, to research concepts such as over unity, energy, R&D, and ET-derived gravity control. The organization involved some of the same key individuals. 1999 till 2015, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BASS, or Advanced Science Studies, I need to correct that, exists from 99 till 2015. In 1999, Bob Wood, Hal Puthoff, and Ron Blackburn host a mini conference. So Bob Wood, Hal Puthoff, and Ron Blackburn, Colonel Ron Blackburn, host a mini conference for UFO researchers in California. The meeting was called, quote, "A New Direction for Greater Ufology," end quote. There, again, I feel like I could just close this and go home right there. Close down my laptop. Yeah. Right there in 99, working group members had this meeting with the top UFO researchers. They had Jim Mars at it, and Linda Moulton Howe, goes on, and Stephen Greer, whatever, on and on. And this meeting was called, quote, "A New Direction for Greater Ufology." Like, these guys are going to tell ufology where to go from there. I hope ufology told them where to go. No, unfortunately they didn't. Shame on me. They should have. Okay, 2000. Melinda and fellow abductee have brainwave scans done by Jack Houck. We're completely unaware of being part of any survey, which we were, but we didn't know we were being dumb about the time. Melinda's given a copy of hers, of one of mine. There were like 10 pages. He gave me one. And the significance is never ever explained to me. I do not know if it shows that I'm an antenna, as they're calling individuals with key patterns for psi. But there's the actual brainwave pattern right there. And if anyone knows how to interpret that, please let me know. 2001, Scott Jones consults another abductee on the writing of her book about her experiences. So here's Scott Jones consulting an abductee, helping her with a book. 2001 to 2004, the FAA, Federal Air Administration, officially directs for all UFO sighting reports to go to Bigelow NIDS. Did NIDS sharing this data with the public ever? Did it ever share any of its collected information from the FAA and UFO sighting reports going to them, or for the work with MUFON? Did it ever share any of it? No. It's gone into a black hole. 2001, NIDS member Dr. Eric Davis meets with Admiral Wilson, and afterwards, so this is the Wilson document story, meets with Admiral Wilson and afterwards writes the now infamous Wilson Notes document. These documents leaked in 2019 were from the personal files of the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who at the time, in 2001, at the time of their writing, by and for NIDS, so in 96, moving forward, so at the time of their writing, he was on the Science Advisory Board for NIDS. I'm sure it was just a consulting position, but he was on the Science Advisory Board. Highlights of the document. So this is highlights specifically of the infamous Wilson memo. First off, the mention of the meeting at BDM Corporation. And I, upon seeing the document, immediately kind of went berserk, contacted Grant Cameron and Richard Dolan. Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm tilting my thing and messing it up. Okay. And said, hold on there, because this mentions a meeting that I have documents about. And Grant also had some documents from that original meeting. He had one part I had one part, and together we have, you know, multiple parts from that meeting in 1985 at BDM. So it mentions that meeting back in 85 in the Wilson interview. So Eric Davis talking to Admiral Wilson. NIDS is the reason Eric was there. That's well understood now. The reason that the meeting happened is that NIDS sent Eric to do that interview. Wilson mentions, Admiral Wilson mentions he knew the history of the group to Eric. So that's stated again in the memo, or in the notes by Eric. This shows a direct link between NIDS and the working group. And it does so because it mentions, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Original working group member Oak Shannon, this is where this comes up. That's why I had his name read on the list. Oak Shannon recommended that Wilson talk to Eric. This is how this came up. Now this states in 2001, I have Oak Shannon being one of the original members of the working group, not knowing that he's still got a connection to it in 2001, or a connection to NIDS, but he's recommending to NIDS that, and he knows Wilson, so he helps facilitate Eric Davis talking to Admiral Wilson. And how do we know that? It's stated right there. Wilson is saying to Eric, Oak Shannon told me all about the group and its history. So Eric is going there to meet with Wilson on behalf of NIDS, but what comes up is that Wilson is saying, Oak Shannon told me about the history of the working group, thus implying the connection to NIDS. So I saw that, put that together, brought it to Grant's attention, who had kind of seen it, and it helped formulate it further, and brought that knowledge of Oak Shannon's involvement in the working group and that reference, and that's why Oak Shannon is saying Wilson should meet with Eric. And so Wilson agreed based upon Oak Shannon say, look, I can verify for this guy. This is a good guy. He's part of this group, which is now NIDS. So it makes that whole connection. This so this shows a direct link between NIDS and the working group. This document demonstrates that the whole group knows much more than they are saying, and certainly much more than they were saying in 2001. The Admiral was, so here's some specific highlights. The Admiral was shut out, so it states this in this, he's talking about, he was shut out completely from finding out about the reverse engineering program when he asked. When he had a right, or he thought he had a right to know about it, because he was Deputy Director of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he held the position of J2. The Wilson document mentions crashed UFOs, alien hardware. And this is, Wilson had a meeting at what we now understand as more likely Lockheed. It's not named in the memo, but most researchers agree that's where he was, and that he was in a closed meeting where he asked to be read in on this, and he wasn't allowed to be read in, but they did give him some, you know, vague parameters, and in that they got into crashed UFOs, alien hardware, the fact that they had one functioning craft, a reverse engineering program, the existence of MJ-12, and Wilson said in the document, quote, there is such an organization in existence, end quote. ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles at Area 51, and Wilson says, quote, it's tightly held info, end quote, and quote, an absurdly held subject matter. I've never seen anything like it. And this is from the guy who was Director of the DIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You guys, that's like, you know, you have the Director of the CIA, the Director of the NSA, and the Director of the DIA. You know, you don't get any higher, you know. So this was out of his jurisdiction? Yes, okay. Funny thing, I've been told the same thing by Semivan. I'll get into that. So special projects, he said it was a special projects group that had all this information, not your usual SAP. Um, so not your, special access program, an unacknowledged special access programs. He said this was yet another thing, a special projects group, not in that purview. So that was kind of new to know that they could go even deeper. Aerospace, he also said an aerospace contractor runs the program. That's what the whole letter is about. An aerospace contractor is involved in help running the alien technology program. And he introduced the terminology, quote, core secret, end quote. I don't think that anyone had heard of that, at least I hadn't before, but the idea of that this subject is held as a core secret, meaning the UFO subject, and that compartmentalization is used to cover it all up. Obviously, very precise compartmentalization to the point where, because this was in the hands of a private company, he did not have access to it in his government position. So that tells you how the compartmentalization works. So that, all those reasons I just stated, is why that document is so important. Did we kind of know a lot of that already? Yes. Did we have a document stating it? No. Did we have a document coming out of MIDS and the working group and Eric Davis interviewing head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2? Hell no. So that's what makes this such a big deal. 2004, NIDS studies black triangle sightings and determine most are of unknown origin. 2005, that's interesting that they did that. I'd like to know more about that. If anybody has more information on that, I'd be very interested. 2005 to 2010, Robert Wood, along with his son Ryan, produces the annual Crash UFO Retrieval Conferences. 2005 to now, for Bass, Dr. Kit Green, Dr. Gary Nolan, and Dr. Jacques Vallée start a database project of individuals with medical evidence, so abductees and close contact witnesses, individuals with medical evidence, burns, skin lesions, cancer, etc., from face-to-face UFO encounters. They also work with other members to collect brain scans, blood, DNA, and endocrine tests from various abductees. And they are still doing this. Kit Green, the picture's the bomb. Kit Green, Dr. Gary Nolan, and Jacques Vallée. 2007 till now, the DoD funds BASS's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, till 2012. And I said, and longer, because there's good reason to think that it goes on. I'll go into that. Robert Bigelow got Senators Reid, Inouye, and Glenn, and Stevens to fund it. I said, see the previous slide regarding all three of them doing the same for the remote viewing program in the 88 and 90s, and possibly previous to that, because if they went to them to help get more funding, they were probably the original guys approving the funding. That's a leap, but I'm assuming that's the case. It's probably not. It's probably a safe assumption. So going back to Luis Elizondo, was the director of AATIP up till late 2017 and leaves it to join to the Stars Academy, or so we're told. Okay. Current director is unknown. Lou says in multiple interviews and appearances, multiple interviews that he's done, radio and TV, and appearances, speaking appearances, that it still exists. Okay, he keeps saying it. 2008 till who knows. Com Kelleher was the deputy administrator of, quote, and it says this on to the Stars website under his bio, a U.S. government threat assessment program focused on advanced aerospace technology. Sound like AATIP? According to his To the Stars bio, okay, he had been deputy director of NIDS. He was the deputy director of NIDS from 95 to 2004 and had this same position with Bass, Bigelow Aerospace, until 2015. I actually spoke to him personally about this. I was at the SSE IRVA conference, the famous one where Hal Puthoff did his famous lecture. And I was there and I actually spoke to him about this. So he had the same position with Bass until 2015. Per Hal Puthoff in the July 2018 SSE IRVA conference lecture that I just mentioned, quote, now you guys, I brought this up at the recent International Congress, and I brought it up during the question period with, I'm pulling a blank real quick. But anyways, pulling a blank all of a sudden. But I brought it up and I caught flack for it. And this is the actual quote from the presentation that I was referencing. So here it is. So this is straight out of Hal Puthoff in his talk at SSE. Quote, Dr. Com Kelleher, he was actually the deputy administrator at Bigelow Aerospace to run the AATIP program out of the Pentagon, end quote. Again, Dr. Com Kelleher was actually the deputy administrator at Bigelow Aerospace to run the AATIP program out of the Pentagon. And we all know that was at Bigelow, okay? Thus spelling out that Bass birthed the AATIP program and Com ran it for them. Bass, his deal, okay, for Bigelow, birthed AATIP, and Com was the deputy administrator for it and helped run it. I question, does he still, if AATIP still exists, like Elizondo keeps saying, I have a big question. Does Com still run it for them? I think it's a legitimate question. I caught flack for asking it. I stand that it's a legitimate question. If I see Com Kelleher again and he's willing to talk to me, I'll ask him. Okay, 2008 to 2011. Bigelow NIDS has a business deal with MUFON for their case files database and utilizing their field investigators. Limited to cases with physical effects, beings, ETs, being sighted, or where reality transformation occurred. In 2010, the international director, James Carrion, MUFON director, James Carrion, resigns over feeling MUFON was being manipulated by Bigelow, stating, quoting James Carrion, quote, it is my belief there are forces at work controlling MUFON, end quote. 2009, John Alexander has NIDS, or now Bass, maybe, okay, and I'll show in the timeline, they kind of overlap, fund the late Dr. Roger Lear for his abduction implant removal surgery costs. How did Roger, where did he get the funding? For 17 surgical removals. He was getting it from Bigelow, or NIDS, he was getting it from NIDS, well, Bigelow NIDS. And that John Alexander, got them to do that, okay. So has NIDS fund the late Dr. Roger Lear for his abduction implant removal surgical cost research and the analysis. Gee, imagine that, and the analysis, which they came up with Earth isotope ratios and nanotechnology and the metallurgy and et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole nother thing to get into Roger's research, but that's what it showed. 2009, John Alexander contacts one of Dr. Lear's implant removal cases repeatedly about his experience data after he was present at that man's surgery. That man told me he avoided him. He didn't want to talk to him. 2011 to 2017, Dr. Scott Jones befriends one of my MILAB cases. Ta-da, another one. This is like the third one from him, okay. That he wants to know about her alien abductions, her MILABs, and psychic abilities. But his main interest is he wanted to know what the craft looked like inside and out. 2011, approximately, an abductee has John Alexander, Eric Davis, and Scott Jones, each staying at his home repeatedly while investigation of his case is ongoing. They actually stayed at his home. 2012 to now, FAA directs for all UFO sighting reports to go to Bigelow Bass. Since they used to go to NIDS, I wonder if this is evidence that Bass is the new NIDS. Okay, obviously. So the FAA directs for all UFO sighting reports to and I believe that this is till now, and that they're still directing sighting reports to go to Bigelow, Bass, but then if it wasn't Bass, then I guess they were directing them to go to AATIP. It's not a far reach, okay? Since they used to go to NIDS, and since Bass is the new NIDS, and what's the new Bass, or what was the new Bass? AATIP. You guys got the rest of it. 2012 to 2019, and yet another abduction case has continual ongoing involvement with members such as Alexander, PUTHOFF, Green, and others. These guys expressed interest in his blood, his DNA, his psi abilities, and his mental testing. They have now completed collecting these from this individual, from this guy. They have now completed collecting blood, DNA, testing for psi, and mental testing. And they and others have thoroughly investigated this individual's abduction case. 2013, Hal PUTHOFF and Kit Green contact yet another. So you guys starting to see a pattern here, okay? Hal PUTHOFF and Kit Green contact yet another important UFO witness abductee and request his DNA. They said they wanted to know if it had been altered in his experiences or by his experiences. 2013 till now. I met retired Air Force, till 2017, because I've lost contact, but only because he hasn't called me, I haven't called him, but we're still friendly. I met retired Air Force Colonel Dr. Ron Blackburn. When he shows up at my office here at the Center for New Age in Sedona, and we established a friendship. He showed up here. I'd asked to see me. Okay, Ron said he was friends with Jack Houck, and that Jack had spoke highly of me and my psi abilities. Shortly afterwards, Jack Houck passes away. I last saw Ron in November of 2017. 2004 to now. Hal PUTHOFF, Kit Green, and Eric Davis contact yet another, oh gosh, here we go again, abductee, remote viewer. And this time, so this woman's an abductee and remote viewer, and this time specifically requesting her psi abilities and her DNA. They request her DNA in the form of blood, saliva, and hair. She was tested for her psi and remote viewing abilities. She is told they are doing this with over 40 other abductees as well, and that it was a serious and well-funded scientific project. And that's a picture of Eric Davis, Dr. Eric Davis. Then I'm also shortly after that, or at that same time period, I'm tasked repeatedly by Ron Blackburn on remote viewing a sensitive target as part of a project with other viewers who I had never met. I agreed to participate for curiosity and research purposes, but assumed, rightfully so, that I was being tested. I received very positive feedback from Ron Blackburn. I did not know why he was having me do this target, other than just to test me. But I got very good feedback from him, so I guess whatever, whatever that means. 2014, Dr. Carl Rosen is persuaded to collaborate with Scott Jones. She had also conferred with him when he was a political aide to Senator Claiborne Pell many years before. 2015, I met with Ron Blackburn again, and he confirms his working group involvement. And that's a picture of Ron Blackburn. And that his meeting, so he confirms his involvement. And I specifically get in this conversation where he, in that he confirms that his meeting me originally was intentional, and he explained how secrecy is maintained. He mentions he had just recently had dinners right before meeting me with Hal PUTHOFF and Scott Jones. And that I came up in conversation, and he said he was going to be coming and meeting me, and that they knew it. He admits to knowing all about my MILAB research and encourages me to write about it. We had not previously discussed it. He brought it up. He brings it up first and says, I know about it, and encourages me to write about it. In 2016 to now, DeLong To the Stars and the Bigelow story takes off. To the Stars officially announced in October of 2017. And there's obviously DeLong, Steve Justice, Paul Rapp, forget everybody's names. Khan, the guy on the end, and Chris Mellon, testing my knowledge. I haven't looked at this in a while, so that's definitely testing my knowledge. Early 2017, the free organization, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, board member Bob Davis sent a copy of their book, his book actually, that he'd written called Should We Believe, to Tom DeLong, in hopes it would change Tom's negative ET perspective by showing that their research showed something altogether different. In a conference call with Tom, some of the board from the free organization, in a conference called Tom DeLong, shared that they strive to let the data drive the results, and that it pointed rather conclusively to an ET contact being about consciousness. Tom later proposed to the board, that they be the abduction research wing for To the Stars Academy, and then proposed funding to them. Because Free was well aware of the past Carpenter affair and MUFON problems with the working group, they said no, and told them that because they are a 501c3, they are prohibited, which means, anyway, so that they are prohibited by law from accepting corporate money. They have to be, private contribution. And so that gave them an out to say, sorry, but no, we can't do it. We can't accept any corporate money. Some of these individuals have additionally, so some of the individuals in the working group and To the Stars have additionally approached Free. It continues to decline involvement and stress that their data is all published for free on their website and that interested parties can access it there. So in other words, you guys, we don't need to do anything with you. We put it all on the site. You can go there and use it along with anybody else. Free hopes that their research data will help persuade To the Stars Academy away from an ET threat perspective. He's really hoping they do consider their data, and that it, good luck with that, guys, will help persuade To the Stars away from their ET threat perspective. While Free seems to have tried to avoid involvement, they have repeatedly been, on one hand, they tell me they're trying to avoid involvement, yet they've been repeatedly consulted by John Alexander, who's mentioned in their big book. It has a chapter in their big book. 2018, Bass and To the Stars has admitted to having a secure building with materials from UAPs. This gets in the metamaterials. And they claim to have an extensive database of abductees and symptoms. Obviously they do. February 2018, Melinda has an over 2-hour lunch with Jim Semivan, Director of Operations for To the Stars Academy and Vice President, along with him and his wife. The highlights are, for clarity, I repeatedly asked him to not tell me anything he doesn't want shared. So I can share this because he knows I'm going to. So I said, don't tell me anything you don't want shared. 2 things are brought up in the conversation that he preferences with, don't share this part. It was understood the rest could be repeated. There's been periodically in other conversations where he's done that. They were minor things. I'm just telling you guys, don't get worked up. They were minor things, and most everything else he said, but he's very guarded when he talks to me, very, very guarded. So what we covered in the original conversations, we covered his CIA background and my UFO background, both quite in depth. His and his wife's abduction experience and their evidence for it. And that's pretty much all I can say, because that's one of the things he didn't want me to share the details of it. But it is well known, and it's been out there, so it was out there before he was talking to me, that him and his wife had an abduction experience together. But the details are something he asked me not to share. And I get it. That's an abductee. Someone doesn't want me to share. I don't. Of course, we also went into my alien abduction history, which he was very curious about. We talked all about To the Stars, AATIP, DeLong, and the various factions. We covered the plans, agendas, and goals, when the next piece of evidence would come out. He said it was that month, February, and said it would be new gun camera footage. It was, but it didn't actually get released until March 9th of 2018. So it was a little off in the date, but he was absolutely, it came out shortly after he said it would. To the Stars was aware of all the problems with the first two pieces of footage and wanted to do their due diligence with the next piece and that analysis experts to back it up. Documentation and new pilots. Yeah, there was documentation, new pilots, but they didn't really ever come out with much photo analysis that they said they had to back it up, and that was curious. I don't know why, but there you go. Maybe they thought the pilot's accounts were good enough. In fact, I'm sure that's probably it. Or that was intended, but then they didn't actually accomplish the analysis. I don't know. That's possible too. Okay. Other forms of evidence, such as documents, reports, and metal fragments, would come later. Much later, he said. They still haven't come, but he said much later. I asked if it was green lighted by the Pentagon at the time, and he said yes. The whole thing was green lighted by the Pentagon. Semivan said that Grant was 80% correct and that they'd given corrections. So far, only one correction was shared with me. So I guess they gave up. I don't know. They never gave me anything else. And they haven't given me corrections to this. Maybe this time they will. We'll see. They've never said no to me, so I'm talking. Okay. And I probably still would. So I think they know they're not going to even try, because what would be the point? Okay. At some point, though, he may get upset with me and not talk to me anymore, and that's always a possibility. So we kind of do this dance, but I'm trying to keep that conduit and connection open. But at the same time, I'm not going to stop talking about it. So he's very guarded with me. And maybe for some reason I'm useful to them, because why does he keep talking to me? Well, I must be useful in some way, or obviously he wouldn't be. Okay, going on. He describes how Pandolfi is just trying to separate himself from the attention that they're getting. There's this recent stuff now with Pandolfi and Eric Davis going back and forth. It's just all very entertaining. It could just be deflection. Whatever, that's what's going on. I should probably go back and read all that and maybe add some of it to this in the future. Okay. Mention was made of the other group and their work with abductees. So in other words, from To the Stars, that they said this other group we're associated with were the ones working with the abductees. I think they mean obviously the working group, whatever they're calling it now. And their work with abductees, including consciousness, DNA, blood work, brainwave monitoring, psi-ability testing, etc. He said this project in To the Stars is all a much bigger group. Now, you guys, this is very important. In that original meeting, he said, this is a much bigger group. What you see on the website for To the Stars Academy, was it 10 or 12 names listed there? I'd have to go back and count. But he said, that's the public face of a much bigger group of like 50 people, of which the To the Stars Board of Directors is just the public face. He said that they're going with what works, meaning To the Stars and their plans. They're going with what works. And regarding aliens, that we can't go there yet. He said this back in this original meeting, we can't go there yet. And that the media had made it clear they didn't want to hear that. That was his claim. His main objective is his main objective, Jim Semivan, I said, what are you in it for? He said, to educate people. He said that they were doing an end run around the government. I'm going to get more into this in my conclusions to this talk, but this is very interesting that he said this to me, and I have a concluding page, okay? That during an end run around the government, that disclosure needs to come from the private sector, private industry for plausible deniability reasons. He said, To the Stars wants to build enough media momentum to take this all the way to Congress for a proper investigation, end quote. I said, if he's correct, I say, if he's correct, then it was likely this would end up getting out of their hands. Oh, I said to him in that original meeting, that this, if he's correct, that this would end up getting out of their hands very fast, and therefore it would not be disclosure because of them, but in spite of them. To which he said, I certainly hope so. You guys, we have that going on, because it seems like this current naval announcement maybe didn't come from them. Came from the research of John Greenwald. If that's true, and it didn't come from them, and now the Navy's saying it in response to a document John got, then this has gotten out of their hands. So to which he said, I certainly hope so. Well, he's getting his wish, I think. Okay, just speculation there, but he may be getting his wish. Okay, he asked me about my MILAB research. He brought this up later in the conversation. We ran out of time to discuss it that first time out. He did offer that while he thought it likely, quote, there are large underground military installations, maglev trains, and UFO reverse engineering projects, etc., end quote, in existence, he didn't know how such programs or a MILAB program could be. He was mostly concerned about the funding, how it would be kept hidden, and more importantly, how it would be funded. He seemed to be perplexed by the likelihood that such programs exist, yet not understanding how the funding would be achieved, and kept secret from the white world intelligence community that he was a part of. That's what he says. June 2018, Melinda has a phone conversation with Jim Semivan again. Now this time, all the additional conversations have been on the phone. I've only met with him that one time. During which he says, there have been, quote, meetings going on in DC, end quote, by To the Stars and its extended members. He added that, quote, we're just trying to get our projects funded, end quote, meaning by Senate subcommittees. That's what he's referring to. Weeks later, both Grant Cameron and myself received word from multiple sources that the group was successful to the tune of about $100 million initially and $400 million to follow shortly thereafter. And this is from Senate subcommittees approving funding for aerospace projects that To the Stars is involved in. And the extended group. So you got to remember, this is a bigger group of like 50 people. The funds were supposedly allocated to intelligence subcontractors, aerospace contractors, and specifically for a UAP threat assessment military research program. 2018, George Knapp interviews To the Stars member Lou Elizondo on Coast to Coast radio program. When George asked, by the way, I was pulling a blank earlier, I met George Knapp. I got up and asked some questions at the end, and I caught some flack because I was quoting what Hal said in that presentation, and I wanted George to say, what did he think about it? And he got defensive because he was defending his friend, Colin Kelleher. We talked in the hallway afterwards. He kind of grabbed me and said, what the hell was that all about? And I said, well, I just wanted to know what you thought of Hal saying that. And he kind of downplayed it. But he's obviously closely associated with these guys and wanting to keep his channels of information open. And so I understand his need to downplay it. I don't think that's a far reach. But I caught flack from everyone when all I was doing was quoting. So please go back in this presentation and look at that again. If you were there when I got up and questioned that, please go back, and because that's all I was bringing up, exactly what I brought up in this presentation. So there you go. Okay, so George Knapp interviews Lou on Coast to Coast radio program. When George asked about whether or not $500 million had been awarded to various programs as a result of To the Stars effort in Washington, D.C., Lou responded, quote, usually there's some truth to rumors, end quote. So here, Lou backs that up. Additionally, Knapp asked Lou whether AATIP still existed, and Lou responded, quote, it was never disestablished, end quote. It never ended. It was never disestablished. And he repeated this several times. Lou then also added in that same interview, quote, we continue to do our job, end quote. I've added the underline to show this curious choice of wording that suggests that Lou himself is still involved with AATIP, or why would he say we continue to do our job? Melinda has multiple phone calls with Jim Semivan, August 2008 to May of 2019. I don't have exact dates, but August to May. Melinda has multiple phone calls with Jim Semivan. The highlights: the only announcements that we're going to hear from To the Stars will be air dates of TV shows. Guess what? That's exactly all we're getting. One TV show airs this month, multiple others in the works. That was back then. That was the unidentified show, the first season, which it did. They say they need more funding for the ATOM project for the metamaterials lab test and research to continue that. So until then, that's all on hold until they get more funding. That's what he said back then. And it will take years to accomplish all that lab testing, that's what he's saying. It'll take many years to accomplish. So don't expect anything on the metamaterials. He was telling me I can go ahead and put that out there. Don't expect anything. It'll take years to accomplish. Everyone keeps getting aside. They'll have an announcement about that. You guys know, unless something suddenly has changed. But up until May, Jim was telling me no. Okay. To the Stars is being told not to talk and to lay low on many fronts for many reasons, including, first off, TV production companies have them sign NDAs regarding their projects. To the Stars must wait till the shows air to mention certain things because of their NDAs with those production companies. But nothing is being said on these shows that folks in ufology who have been following this story don't already know. These shows are for public consumption and will cover only the basic story. Only new information may be military witnesses to other FLIR events. That was certainly true with Unidentified, the TV show. He also said aerospace companies are telling them not to talk because of not wanting to lose their funding for technology development projects, and that To the Stars and its partners have been included on as consultants, etc. So they said, we don't want to lose our funding. And he said to me repeatedly, I said, what could I do to get me in trouble? He said, screw up our funding. I said, don't blow. I think the actual quote was, don't blow our funding. I don't know what I could say to blow their funding. Hopefully none of this is it. Okay. Senate and Pentagon officials are telling them not to talk because of not wanting to end that funding. He and some of the To the Stars guys are trying to work out their schedules to come visit me here in Sedona. That's what he has said repeatedly. It may end up being only him because, you know, Tom, for instance, DeLong is out there with both his bands, Blink and Angels in the Airwaves. I know he's been touring with Angels in the Airwaves or whatever, so obviously he's been extremely busy. But so it may end up being only him, and he has requested to talk with me extensively about my MilLab research and experiences. He says that's why he wants to come. He wants to sit down and talk to me all about that. Very interesting. He mentioned discussing about having me, he has mentioned more than once about when he comes, about discussing about having me tested for DNA, blood, and brain scan for the caudate putamen antenna to see if I have that. Quoting him, I should have this here, but I'm quoting Jim. He said, I bet you have the caudate putamen to beat the band. Same as other abductees. I'll talk to him about it. I may be willing to, because I said I have already told him if I do this, I'm only willing to if they share all the results with me. I really want to know what the findings are to that. And if they agree to that, then I'll probably agree to doing it. So there we go. A lot of people might go, oh God, don't do that. But, you know, I feel like, hey, I can be tested, you know, DNA, blood, brain scan, and for the caudate putamen, that would be very interesting. I'm very curious if I have it. So, whoops, sorry, I'm just messing with my screen here, sorry. Okay, June 2019. Melinda has 2 phone conversations with Jim in the beginning of June and the end of June. And the end of June was the last time I spoke to him. Time goes by. It feels like it wasn't that long ago, but I did just in the last couple of days send him a text with a link to the movie The Seating, which I'm in. Probably all of you know that or have seen it, and ask him if he had seen it. He said no, but he would watch it. I'm also going to send him a link, since he's obviously so interested in my MILAB work, and it's obviously out there, but I'll send him a link to my last talk I did for you guys on my MILAB's research. So I'll send him that. This one I may not. Anyways, but I'll send him those. If he finds this on his own, that's fine, but I won't wave it in his face. Okay, Melinda has 2 conversations with Jim Sammy Van. In the first call, I asked him for the third time, about his previous comments that To the Stars is a much bigger group of like 50 people, and that the listed folks on their website is just the public face of that much bigger group. And he said, quote, yes, that's true. That number is correct. It is a much bigger group, end quote. So there you go. In the second call, he said that the Naval and Pentagon announcements up till right then, so up till the end of June anyways, he was saying the Navy and Pentagon recent announcements were all pushed by To the Stars Academy on their meetings with the senators. And the senators who have come forward met with the members of To the Stars. He also said that if the TV show Unidentified got picked up again for a second season, that this time, which it has, by the way, folks, we just heard this week, the show Unidentified, Tom DeLonge's been putting it out there, talking about it on Twitter, got picked up for a second season, and that this time they'll address that it's ETs. In the show, they're going to address that what is behind this is extraterrestrial in nature. That's what Jim told me. I'm going to call him again and ask him. But until I get a chance to, in the end of June, he told me if they get that second season, which now they know they have, they will address ETs. And I asked him about the Wilson document and other documents, and he gave me a 43-minute long non-denial. Very much like the one Richard Dolan said that Hal Puthoff. Richard Dolan had a conversation on the phone with Hal Puthoff. Hal had said regarding the Wilson document, quote, or no, not Hal, sorry, Dolan. Richard Dolan said this. Sorry, I'm tired now and it's going on and on. Richard Dolan said that Hal Puthoff had given, so this is a quote from Richard, it was a brilliant, carefully worded non-denial, end quote, from Hal. Well, so was this. So was this 43-minute conversation with Jim. Here's the highlights of what Jim said to me about the Wilson documents. Okay, I'll just go through these real quick. I can't comment because this is, these are all quotes. So I can't comment because many of us still have clearances. Quote, we are bound by our oaths. We have those oaths till our death, end quote. And then when Melinda asked what is To the Stars' official position on the documents, he said, quote, To the Stars simply can't comment, end quote, and quote, we'll see where it goes, end quote. He also said, quote, because of our oaths of secrecy, comment, that they can't comment, okay. Quote, we're not allowed even when we know something about it or may want to comment. In other words, they know stuff about this, okay, it's not hard to extrapolate. We're not allowed even when we know something about the document or may want to comment, end quote. I repeatedly gave him, in our phone conversation, I repeatedly gave him every chance to deny it, and he never did. An example, I asked if the ufology field was wasting its time with the documents, and again he said, quote, no comment, end quote. Even if, he also said, quote, if one sentence in the document is classified or dealing with something that is, we cannot comment on the entire document, end quote. Like that's official CIA training. Even if one sentence of the document is classified or dealing with something that is, we cannot comment on the entire thing. quote, he also said, "We are friends with many of the individuals mentioned," end quote. He said, quote, "We do not want to create problems, difficulties for those mentioned. It could be embarrassing. It could cause them grief. It could have legalities for them or be detrimental towards their jobs, positions, or their projects," end quote. Early after the document leak, now this is just from me, early after the document leak, most researchers glossed over the BEDM meeting reference in the Wilson memo. Oak Shannon's, they glossed over Oak Shannon's name, they didn't know what that was, and the AP10 group mention, which is the reference to the working group. I brought this to the attention of Richard Dolan, who has since given me credit for doing so, and I appreciate that very much, Rich, all the credit you've given me for that. Okay, a timeline of ufology manipulation. So here we have the first, you can see at the top, years in the game and counting. So the first two little columns are 5 years, 5 years, and then from then on, each column is 1 year. And then the game going down, the various games being played. So you have the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, the Aviary, Bob Bigelow, Rockefeller, Bigelow's involvement with MUFON, NIDS, BASS, AATIP, OSAP combined. I should probably create another column in there eventually, but okay, AATIP, OSAP, and then To the Stars. So first you have the working group going on for like 10 years and the aviary going on for 10 years because, as I already stated, the aviary was the working group. There you go, that's very clear. Okay, then you have, starting in 1990 with Bigelow's involvement and then going forward till the current, obviously. The Rockefeller Initiative going forward till at least 2016, and then questionably whether something is still going on there. Their involvement with MUFON ending in 2011 to the best of my ability, but then I have it moving on there with that question mark saying, well, there's again reason to believe, and I'm hearing stuff through the grapevine, that Bigelow may be funding stuff for them again. I don't know if that's true. I know Jan Harzan, director of MUFON. I should probably call him and ask him, see if he tells me, if he would. But I know him pretty well, maybe he would. Okay, so next is NIDS involvement and BASS, the formation of BASS. I have it continuing, although Calm said at the SSE conference that it ended, I think, in like 2012 or something, but I question that some variation, whatever they're calling themselves, or going on, or if it is just going on under the guise of AATIP, which, again, Lou Elizondo said repeatedly still exists. So there you go. And then, of course, To the Stars, which is currently going on. But I think it's really interesting when you map these out on a timeline, how much they overlap with each other. They're all kind of going on at the same time. Each black asterisk is the year they started up a new UFO project. And each red asterisk is a year they were involved with abductees or abduction research organizations. So they had constant ongoing UFO projects. And look at all the red asterisks. Those are just the years. So those aren't individual time frames. Those are whole years of involvement with abductees or abduction research organizations. Okay, now here's getting to the last two slides. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me. I know we're going on and on and on, but it was a lot to cover. So we're coming down to the end. Possible end games for the minders. I talked about this earlier. Well, here it is. Okay, first off, disclosure. Okay, maybe. Disclosure of the kind that all of us in the room would like to see, maybe not. Okay. Number two, disinformation or misinformation. Maybe, okay. Possible end games for the minders, that they'll have well-placed inside folks who are ready to roll on their plan or on somebody's plan. I think that's a given. The new Cold War, the new space race, or the new techno age, helping usher that in. I think they're hoping so. A wartime, certainly To the Stars, right? A wartime economy, a Cold War economy, or a new techno boom economy. A marketing, production, publishing, documentary film, TV production, Or movie venture. Okay, well, they're all obviously to the stars doing all this right now. Let me see, marketing, production, yeah. Publishing, yeah. Documentary film, yeah. TV production, yeah. Movie venture, maybe. There's talk that they might have something going on. Okay, they're doing this currently. Okay, but definitely TV, because they've been picked up for that second season of Unidentified. Okay. Next is, again, so what is the end game for the miners, for the working group? Could it be a false flag, setting up the public to buy it, whatever it is? I'm not a big proponent or fan of this, but I can't certainly deny that it's always a possibility and should be kept on the back burner as, you know, we're being set up for something, okay? To always be one spin ahead of the information game. In other words, to the stars may be placing themselves on top as the go-to guys on the UFO subject and not ufology. I think UFO researchers need to take that in consideration. Make sure this doesn't walk away from us, okay? That it doesn't become them as the go-to guys. That ufology has a voice on this subject, certainly in the media, and everybody needs to act responsibly when talking to the media so that we maintain credibility, because if we look foolish, the media is always going to go to these guys and they'll become the spokespersons on it. So I think this is, you know, to place themselves on top as the go-to guys and not ufology. I think this is something we need to be very leery of. Okay, next, to usher in a new political agenda or a newer New World Order, it's always a possibility, and for some form of global dominance, certainly for a US space dominance. Again, we get into those whole things like Trump's Space Force, etc. So, which now I know has a new name, and I need to look it up, and in the future I'll update this slide with that new name. But obviously that's going on at the same time. Is it connected to our getting a soft disclosure right now? I think it's very likely that it is. We don't know for sure, but I think it's highly likely that those two things are connected. Okay, so additionally, an elaborate so here, this is kind of is along lines of what I just said, but here in blue, these are the most significant. An elaborate intelligence operation to bring about UFO disclosure via the private sector for plausible deniability. Going back to my first meeting with Semivan, he said it was an end run, you know, an end run around the government. And what if that's exactly what they're doing? An elaborate intelligence operation to bring about UFO disclosure via the private sector for plausible deniability, or to bring about something else, like maybe the next thing on this list. So either that, or to bring about the next thing on this list, which is aerospace, military, and technology contracts awarded, money to be made. They are having closed doors with senators. They're selling it to them as a threat to get funding for their projects. According to Semivan, we only want to get our projects funded. Again, aerospace, military, and technology contracts have been awarded. Money will be made, and maybe that was their goal all along. Next one is all the above, which I think it probably is. Of course, some of the above, because I could be wrong on any of those. And last but not least, none of the above, and I have a line through that because it ain't even possible. This is my final slide. I think it's important, my personal involvement, and I feel my putting this out there is meant to inform ufology about the fact that there's a 40-year history behind this group of people, what they're doing, and that what they're doing is nothing new, and it is an example of exactly how the game is played. And I risk doing so, but this first line here sums up my feelings. I'm a MILAB, and I don't owe anybody anything seriously. On the upside, we may get disclosure in this whole process in spite of these guys, just not because of them. And I say not because of them because you guys, they have a 40-year history of the truth not necessarily being their objective. Did they suddenly turn over a new leaf and go, oh, well, we're all about the truth now? No. No. Okay? I don't think so. Probably not, given their intelligence. I think it's just what I was just saying. They're getting their projects funded. Okay, we may get disclosure in this process in spite of these guys, just not because of them. And this recently of stuff by the Navy, it could be an example of that, okay? Just be aware and watch out for the spin. And let's make sure that if we do get any kind of disclosure, that it's real, not based on fear or sold unnecessarily as an ET threat, of which there's little or no evidence in support of. Little or no evidence. We shoot at them. Do they shoot at us? Very rarely. We shut them down. Most abductees feel that their experiences are transformative and very positive. A high percentage of abductees. Especially the longer they've lived with that experience, the longer they've come to terms with it, they see it as purely transformative. Again, there's little or no evidence of support of it being, of ETs being a threat. So, but that being sold could cause for a lot of military and aerospace technology development, couldn't it? Okay, it would be the basis for it. And a space force. Okay. It is ufology's job to hold their feet to the fire. Everyone rolls over, oh, to the stars, we're so glad they're doing this for us. You guys, that, yes, I get we're getting some disclosure out of it. That's why I don't want to bite the hand that feeds us. But at the same time, we need to hold their feet to the fire. It is our job to hold their feet to the fire. The truth is at stake. Again, the working group has a 40-year history of something else. So the truth is at stake here. But I have faith that the truth will come to light. At length, the truth will out, as said by William Shakespeare. And by the way, that was the closing quote to the X-Files miniseries. Mulder said, the truth will come to light. At length, the truth will out. Mulder, I'm right there with you. And William Shakespeare. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melinda. That was a lot of information.
Yes, it was.
I know that some of the members here probably have some questions. So if you guys would just write in the chat if you have a question. I'll just start off and say it's been very confusing to see and listen to why researchers like yourself, Richard Dolan, Grant Cameron, and others have this kind of a collaboration with these people that are in this presentation. But somehow you must feel that some truth is coming out that is, since you continue having talks with Semivan or Hal Puthoff, which Richard Dolan's had, it's been confusing to understand why you keep this collaboration going. Can you explain more on that?
Sure. No, and I can understand people's questioning and concern about that. It's something I'm constantly having to double check with myself. Well, one is, okay, first off, they're the biggest show in town right now, the biggest game in town. They're the current ufology news story of the last 2 years. They are, and I have had this conversation with Jim Semivan actually in one of our phone conversations. I said, ufology is not doing a lot of finger pointing with you guys because we see that you are making a difference. I take clients out every night on my UFO sign tour. I've had over 7,500 clients. In the past 2 years, I've had thousands of people who told me they can now talk to their coworkers, their family members, about their interest in the subject because of it breaking as a mainstream news story. And it's breaking of a mainstream news story, we owe in great part, if not completely, to the STARS / the working group. So part of me is like, okay, well, and I told Jim, you guys are making a difference, and we're all sitting back and waiting what's coming next, yet cautious because of that. Even people who were backing and supporting when the TV show Unidentified aired, and all its segments, the season 1, even Dolan, who was saying, oh, not a threat, not a threat, you know, I mean, you know, they're not selling it that way, suddenly even kind of had to do a little mea culpa a little bit in the end when after the last segment, it kind of became clear that they were. Now, again, this is in big part so that they get funding for projects. It does become a little problematic if they start selling that to a general populace and selling fear. So even those people ask me, are you for or against To the Stars and what they're doing? I think it's more complicated than either a pro or con conversation. Obviously, they're making a difference. Obviously, like I said, my clients can talk to their loved ones and their family and their and friends and their coworkers now about the UFO subject because it's going mainstream. Particularly now this week, I mean, this is happening increasingly. I mean, what's going to happen next? We're always like, whoa, because over the last 2 years, this is increasingly happening. But certainly this week with the Navy, saying, look, those footages are real, that's huge. Of course, that's huge. And that's historical. I think
it is.
Retrospectively, his disclosure, I think his disclosure moves forward, which I don't think is going away. And I think that cat is out of that bag, what they say, the toothpaste is out of that tube, it's not going back. So what's coming next? How is this going to proceed? We have the media attention. That's why I say ufology, watch your P's and Q's. We have the media's attention. Use it wisely. And so this is a game changer on this subject. It's a game changer in history. And so am I pro To the Stars because they made that happen? I'm wondering what they're going to do next. I'm watching everything they're doing. Yes. Do I have concerns about the way they may be doing it? Yes. And if I have semi-ban willing to still talk to me, if they take this in a way that's negative towards abductees, negative towards the ET presence and the consciousness or the psi components or any of those things, he knows I'm going to be all over his ass like white on rice, if he'll listen to me. And I have his ear. So I feel I have responsibility there. And I'm trying not to ruin that relationship. By doing this presentation, I walk in a thin line, yeah. But I think so are George Knapp. George Knapp is talking to them. Chase Koletsky is talking to them, okay? Richard Dolan is talking to them. I'm talking to at least one of them, Alejandro Rojas talking to Lou, we've all got our contact. And so why do I understand why they do. I hope they understand why I do. I think we're all coming from the same place with caution and yet realizing, hey, this is the biggest game in town. If we can have one toe in feeling the temperature, we're keeping that toe in.
Yes.
Feeling the temperature of the water.
Yeah. They have made a lot of strides in getting this information out to the public and the videos out. So I agree that so the Stars Academy has done a lot for the topic for the past 2 years. I noticed that you don't mention any abductees' names in your lecture, but I know at least one who's been speaking about the DNA work that's been done, and that's John Burroughs from the Rendlesham case. His DNA test, as far as he's been speaking, has been quite strange. That the results of his DNA test that's done by these scientists, and also his son,
Gary Nolan and Kit Green.
Yes, exactly, and his son's DNA was, as far as John Burroughs said, he almost didn't have a DNA. Have you any more information about the results of these DNA tests they're doing?
No. No, you just said as much as I know about that. I think John's being kind of closed lip about it. And so, no, you've said as much as I know.
Okay, and you don't know about other abductees' results?
No, because this is part of the deal. These guys aren't sharing the results. No one's getting their results that I'm aware of. I know abductees who have provided, done the testing. I know multiple, obviously, but I'm not hearing of anybody who was told the results of those tests. If John is getting results from them, he's very lucky. But I've not heard. Now, if anyone watching this, if you're one of the abductees who's been tested by them and they've come back to you with the results, I would love to hear it. And if you ask me not to share the details, I won't, of course. I always hold, if people say, do not share this, I don't. And so, but I'd be very interested in talking to you because I've heard nothing of what those results are finding.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I have Sam who would like to ask a question. So if Sam would just come on, he has a question for you.
Yeah,
hi there.
Hi, Melinda. Thanks for a mind-blowing lecture.
Thank you.
Really
I felt
great.
like I was droning on and on because I'm just talking to my computer, and without response and without audience response, you're like, so it feels like I just go on and on and on. But I wanted to get it all out there because this presentation keeps growing. I keep adding to it. Nothing's going away. I even tried to edit it down before doing today's presentation, and all I had was new stuff to add. I had nothing to edit out,
Yeah, it's not really a question. It's regarding Alexander's knowledge about Rendlesham. Don't you think Kit Green told him about it? He arrived at the base soon after the incident.
Well, as
a CIA's cleanup guy.
Oh, I've not heard that Kit Green was there.
It's documented.
Oh, would you please contact me on Facebook Messenger with any, any information you have or links to your sources on that? Because I did not know that Kit was there.
Yes.
I can add something on that note, because in the UK this past weekend, they had a conference where Charles Holt, he said that Kit Green confirmed that Kit Green had been at the base within days, and there was also also a witness that had said that there was these people in doctors' uniforms, and that
well, that I know. That I know that there was constant drugging and hypnosis and interrogation kind of stuff happening in the days following the event, and 2 weeks into the event was a MILAB event involving some of the guys. As well as there were abductions on night number 1 and night number 3. That Kit Green was one of the doctors there. That is huge news. That is obviously something I need to build into if I ever do this presentation again. Luckily, we're having it come up in the questions now. Thank you, you guys. But when I redo this, I'm going to add that, and I need to know, well, I guess I just added in with 1980 that happened, but I need to know maybe the source. Why you guys say it's Charles Halt, but I would need to maybe get a copy or a link to Charles Halt his presentation when he's saying that, because him saying that Kit was there, that's, what can I say? Boom, that's
huge.
That's right there with John Alexander calling him. Now, you're right, maybe Kit told John, or maybe it's separate, but the fact that Kit's there and part of the working group and part of this current investigation into abductees, I mean, you guys, what can I say? It is par for the course and just proves my point completely.
I'll try to find the documents.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And if anybody's got a link to that presentation by Charles Halt, please contact me in Facebook Messenger and provide me that link, please.
I'm not sure it was in the lecture, but at least at the event, he confirmed it. It was just a very short. People were writing about it a week ago, so I'll try to find something in some.
Well, and if somebody has Charles's contact information that they would be willing to provide me, because I call him and ask him personally, and then I can just quote him directly, which is always best.
It's not easy to contact.
Yeah, well, the fact that he's talked to me once before, maybe that'll help, because I'll say, do you remember we've met, and you know, maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for sharing that. That's a piece of information.
We'll try to do our best.
Thank you. Well, you did. Thank you. Good researchers. Yay.
Anybody else in the group that wants to ask a question, please just write in the chat. What more? Yeah. There's so much information. I had some questions along the way. As far as I know, Stephen Greer also worked for Bob Bigelow for a short period of time, I believe. Is that true? Or
a few people told me that. I don't have specifics. I mean, the Wilson document talks about, you know, Greer's meeting with Wilson and everything, but Eric's being sent to talk to him happened much later. So I don't know that there's a direct connection there. But someone else, I've heard through the grapevine, so if someone has some specifics on this, I'd be very interested, Randy would too, in knowing if Greer at some point had funding from Bigelow or anything like that. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know.
No, okay.
You know, as much as I know about this, I constantly, that's why this is constantly changing and updating. I'm constantly learning more, and Randy's learning more, and he calls me, and Grant calls me, and now I'm talking to Dolan about stuff, and James Rick, you know, so it's like, it's a constant, and all this is currently happening right now. I mean, again, when I go back and think all those years ago that Randy and I did that like concluding talk for Bob Brown at International Congress, my God, to think of where this has come now and where this has come in the last 2 years, and how, and then Randy and I feeling that we need to be giving this talk now. I need to be giving this talk now because this matters with what's going on right now and the biggest news story happening right now.
Well, what's your take on that the Pentagon is not confirming Luis Elizondo's role within the AATIP program?
It could be just, it was done through such plausible deniability through, you know, through Bigelow, that it gives them the out to be able to deny it till it's useful for them to come forward with it. You know, it's one of those things I suppose I should ask Jim about and say, what's going on there? Why are they doing that? And, you know, and it could be he had a lesser involvement and it's being a little overblown. So, you know, I think both ways are possible, whether To the Stars and Lou are overplaying it, or whether the Pentagon is underplaying it. Who knows?
Okay, Carsten
I
has
think
a
there's evidence that the Pentagon funded it. There was an office at the Pentagon. It was run out of Bass. You know, Bass begat AATIP and ran it out of Bigelow. I think there's a ton of evidence for that. And you know, and that Lou was doing that program, that it had funding from the Pentagon, that funding came from Inouye, Stevens, and Glenn, you know, so it might just be being real nitpicky. And who's the Pentagon spokesperson saying that? Have they really had access to the facts? You know, there could be a lot of reasons. And I'm not saying the Pentagon is wrong, but that's not, I don't think that discredits Elizondo. But it could diminish his role, which may be the truth. And he's kind of being the front person on this story, yet they could be deflecting from him having a significant role. I go back to questioning if Colin Kelleher had a bigger role. I just do. Sorry. Please don't everybody get on my case. But I'm just quoting Hal. That's all I can say there. So,
when Richard Dolan got a quote from Kit Green,
yes,
surrounding the Santilli documents, Kit Green said that he was lied to by the Pentagon in the 1980s surrounding alien autopsy pictures and files. Did that surprise you that he came with that statement? That
no, no, because again, you know, it could be classic deflection from anything the Pentagon said to him at the time. And it's obvious they're trying to deflect from the embarrassment that came with the release of those emails and that memo stating that they had an interest and were backing up the reality of the alien autopsy back then, when obviously since then it's been disproven. But I think they've made their position clear that, or at least semi, that yeah, they thought that then, but not now. And so could Green just be giving that as a quick explanation to say, to kind of deflect and say, oh, I must have been told something, I must have been lied to? Maybe. Or the Pentagon and, you know, hey, ufology for a long time thought it was legitimate. And there were a lot of people backing it before research was done and people came forward in regards to the making of the film to then discredit it, the alien autopsy film. So it could be, you know, that at one time Kit Green and the Pentagon were seriously looking into it, but it's easy to brush off blame from himself and or from the Pentagon by saying, oh, well, I was just lied to, you know, because then everybody kind of just drops it. So, but I think it's embarrassing to them for sure, because it suggested at one time they were taking it seriously. But again, ufology, don't point fingers at them for taking it seriously when most people in ufology took it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always found the whole story to be extremely suspicious and was relieved when information came forward. I felt vindicated when the information came forward to say, no, it turned out to be a hoax. So,
but the difference in that is that Kit Green says he's seen information in the 1980s before the film came out, and that it very much looked like the same type of being or something. Do you think there's a connection, or somehow that some of this footage got into the movie? Or
well, yes, and that's what Ray Santilli says to this day. Says we recreated some, and some of it was legit, and then we were given stuff that we didn't think was good enough to use, and we used what we could. You know, he's gives this whole complicated story. So you know, but I think it's so problematic. It's like, do we need the alien autopsy film to be real for there to be disclosure or to know what the truth is? No, we don't. And whenever a case is so problematic, if ufology isn't resting its whole factual evidence on that one case, once it becomes that problematic, you can kind of sidestep it. Like, does it really matter? It's too problematic. And that's my feeling. So even if there is any real footage in there, the whole story is too problematic. I think people not you guys by any means, but I think people bringing it up could be used as a deflection away from the fact that we have very serious, real movement forward, you know. So it's problematic, yes, but because it's problematic, I don't think ufology needs it to be real to support ufology, to support the fact that there's an alien presence and that UFOs, an unidentified craft, are real. You know, we don't need the Santilli. So I think it's so problematic, it's better to just kind of walk away from it.
I agree with you that I've kind of also just released that film and said it's not the major part of this, but I did find it very interesting that Kit Green in the document had been at these briefings with the Pentagon about alien autopsies.
Well, he was
in the 1980s. So that
he was manning their, what they called their weird desk, you know. He was doing that, you know, at the time. And, you know, these guys have these intelligence backgrounds and they do have some personal knowledge. They have things they cannot talk about with this subject matter. So now holding back is not necessarily lying, you know. Many of these guys involved in To the Stars and the bigger 50 people in the group and the working group and BAS and AATIP and everything, have they held back? Well, heck, you know. Yes. Always keep in mind. And then when stuff like this comes out, they have to do their dance of, oh, well, we knew about it, but, you know.
Yeah.
Well, they're securing their oaths. They're keeping their oaths secured, like Jim said to me. They're securing funding for their projects. You know, so just know, you know, they're going to have to do this dance. And we're not getting full disclosure, guys. We're not getting the full picture. Don't ever think for a minute that you are. You're getting a controlled, long-term, slow, deliberate unfoldment for a purpose, whether that purpose is military involvement, space exploration, a new economy, all those things I said on that list. But it's not disclosure because, oh, we think we should tell you the truth all of a sudden. That's not their motivation. They have other motivations where a little bit of disclosure might be useful.
Okay. Thank you for that. Carsten has a question for you. Carsten, are you ready?
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for a wonderful lecture, Melinda. It was so great.
Thank you for giving me so much time to do it.
Yeah, my question goes back to the news media, a bit about the news media. Do you think that the news media, this openness and that they take the matter serious, actually could be a kind of control from the group behind?
Well, certainly they're being fed the story was. So being fed the story, being fed new parts of the story, yes. Their reaction to it, no. I think you've had some very telling and humorous reactions from certain, when you say media, print is reacting one way and then television broadcast, but television broadcast seems to be kind of befuddled over this in a way that I think is a real emotional reaction. The fact that they're befuddled by it doesn't the befuddling doesn't seem to be scripted, even if they're given some scripted information. Their reaction to it seems to be reactionary, you know. So are they being given information? Yeah. Their reaction to it may be legit. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
We don't have any more questions at the present.
And that's just as well, because I actually kind of need to get going. I'm teaching a psychokinesis spoon bending class in under an hour, and I've got a very important errand and I got to eat before that.
Okay. You know, as soon as we hang up here, I'll have 20 more questions, but that's always how it is. I want to, on behalf of our group, thank you so much for doing this, and I hope one day to meet you face to face. I know
I do too. I look so forward to it.
One of our members has met you, Yen, who was here today, but we would very much like to thank you for giving such informative lectures, and I will have to read each and every slide of this several times to pick everything up. So thank you for doing that.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you very much. You know, I really appreciate being given the forum to not only get an updated version of all my research out there, but also give it to, in great part, a new audience, as far as, like I said, the European audience. And I truly appreciate that. And you know, again, the forum and the opportunity to get my research out there and being given such a huge amount of time. And I appreciate anybody sticking all the way through this presentation to the end. Thank you very much for you know, giving my research part of your valuable time. I really appreciate it.